In a distant corner of the galaxy, far beyond the reach of Earth's most advanced telescopes, an alien coalition known as the Krylos Confederacy was in trouble. For centuries, they had ruled over their sector of space with unmatched strength and unity. But now everything was falling apart. The Vorthak Horde, a merciless race of insectoid warriors, had been pushing deeper into Krylos territory with each passing day. Entire planets had fallen under their relentless attacks, and the once proud Confederacy found itself on the brink of collapse. The leaders of the Krylos knew they needed help. Desperate help. They couldn't rely on their own forces anymore. Too many ships had been destroyed, too many soldiers lost. So they turned to the one resource that always seemed to deliver results: mercenaries. Across the stars, there were countless groups of hired fighters who lived for battle and thrived on chaos. These mercenaries came from all kinds of species, each more dangerous than the last. Some were ex-soldiers looking for credits, others were criminals seeking redemption, or at least enough money to keep running. Whatever their reasons, they shared one thing in common. They didn't care about causes or ideals. They cared about getting paid. Among those called upon was Zorvak, a towering figure with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. He wasn't just any mercenary, he was one of the best. Over decades of fighting, he had earned a reputation for being ruthless, efficient, and utterly unstoppable. His team, a mix of skilled warriors from different worlds, followed him without question. Together they had taken on jobs that would make lesser beings tremble. From escorting high-value targets through pirate-infested zones to assassinating warlords hidden behind layers of security, nothing seemed impossible for them. When Zorvak received the message from the Krylos leaders, he felt a flicker of curiosity. It wasn't often that such a powerful alliance begged outsiders for assistance. The coordinates provided led to a small moon orbiting a gas giant deep within contested space. According to the briefing, this location served as both a strategic stronghold and a supply depot. If it fell, the entire Krylos defense line would crumble. That's where Zorvak and his team were supposed to step in, to hold the line until reinforcements could arrive. But when Zorvak arrived at the designated coordinates, something unexpected happened. As his ship descended toward the surface of the moon, he noticed unusual activity below. There were structures, human structures, buildings made of metal and glass, vehicles moving along dirt roads, and figures walking around in uniforms. Humans. What were humans doing here? This part of the galaxy was supposed to be unclaimed by any major power, especially not Earth. Yet there they were, clearly setting up some kind of base. Before Zorvak could process what he was seeing, another transmission came through. This time it wasn't from the Krylos leaders but from someone else entirely. A human voice, calm and measured, spoke over the comms. "Attention, unidentified vessel. You are entering restricted airspace. Please state your purpose and prepare for inspection." Zorvak frowned. Inspection? By humans? He activated the comm system and responded, careful to keep his tone neutral. "This is Zorvak of the Black Talon Mercenary Guild. We've been contracted by the Krylos Confederacy to assist in defending this location." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a soft chuckle. "Ah, so you're the cavalry we've heard about. Well, welcome to Delta 7. Just follow the beacon to landing zone Alpha. And don't worry, we'll explain everything once you're on the ground." Zorvak exchanged glances with his crew. Something about this situation felt off. Humans weren't known for being pushovers, but they also weren't exactly top-tier players in interstellar politics. Sure, Earth had made strides in recent years, expanding its influence and establishing colonies on nearby planets. But compared to the mighty empires and ancient civilizations scattered across the cosmos, humanity was still considered young and inexperienced. Why would the Krylos bring mercenaries to a place already occupied by humans? And why did the human commander sound so confident? As Zorvak's ship touched down on the designated landing zone, he got his first good look at the humans. They were smaller than most species he'd encountered, with pale skin and rounded features. Their uniforms were practical yet plain, lacking the elaborate designs favored by many alien militaries. Despite their unassuming appearance, they carried themselves with quiet assurance. Weapons were slung casually over their shoulders, and their movements suggested familiarity with combat. One man stepped forward, his insignia marking him as a lieutenant. "Lieutenant Daniel Hayes," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "Thanks for coming. We could use all the help we can get." Zorvac hesitated before shaking the offered hand. Up close, the human didn't seem particularly intimidating. His grip was firm but not aggressive, and his expression was open and friendly. Still, appearances could be deceiving. Zorvac decided to test the waters. "Your presence here is unexpected," he said bluntly. "What exactly is your role in this conflict?" Hayes shrugged, unfazed by the question. "We're special forces, sent here to establish a foothold and gather intel on the Vorthak. Turns out this moon is sitting on some valuable resources they want pretty badly. When the Krylos reached out for help, Command figured we might as well stick around and lend a hand." Zorvac narrowed his glowing eyes. "And the Krylos agreed to let you stay?" "More or less," Hayes replied with a grin. "Let's just say we convinced them it was in everyone's best interest." That answer only deepened Zorvac's suspicions. Convincing the Krylos to share control of a critical stronghold with humans sounded like no small feat. These soldiers must have done something impressive to earn that kind of trust. Or perhaps they simply intimidated the Krylos into compliance. Either way, Zorvac resolved to keep a close eye on them. Whatever these humans were capable of, he intended to find out before committing fully to the mission. Over the next few hours, Zorvac and his team were given a tour of the base. It was modest by galactic standards but functional. Barracks, supply, depots, and weapon caches were spread out in a way that maximized efficiency while minimizing vulnerability to attack. The humans moved with practiced ease, their interactions marked by a mix of professionalism and camaraderie. Zorvac noticed how they addressed each other by name, joked lightly between tasks, and seemed genuinely comfortable in one another's company. It was a stark contrast to the rigid hierarchies and cold efficiency he was used to seeing among other military units. One particular exchange caught his attention. A female officer, her blonde hair tied back in a tight ponytail, was briefing a group of soldiers near the command center. Her nameplate read, Captain Rachel Monroe. She spoke with authority but also with warmth, occasionally pausing to ask for input or clarify points. The soldiers listened intently, nodding along, as she outlined strategies for reinforcing the perimeter. When she dismissed them, they dispersed quickly, already putting her instructions into action. Zorvac approached her afterward, curious to learn more. "Captain Monroe," he began, his deep voice drawing her gaze. "I understand you lead this unit. Tell me, what makes you think you can hold this position against the Vorthak?" Monroe studied him for a moment before answering. "It's not about thinking," she said finally. "It's about doing. We adapt, we improvise, and we never give up. That's what keeps us alive out here." Her words were simple but carried weight. Zorvac found himself intrigued despite his initial skepticism. Perhaps these humans weren't as naive or inexperienced as he'd assumed. Maybe there was more to them than met the eye. Only time would tell if they truly deserved the reputation whispered about in the shadows of the galaxy. Zorvac spent the next few days observing the humans closely, trying to piece together what made them so different from other species he'd encountered. At first glance, they seemed unremarkable. Smaller than most aliens with soft features and fragile-looking bodies. Their technology wasn't particularly advanced either. Their weapons were crude compared to the plasma rifles and energy blades wielded by galactic elites. Even their armor looked basic, patched together in places, with materials scavenged from who knows where. Yet there was something about them that didn't add up. Something Zorvac couldn't quite put his finger on. The humans trained constantly, often starting before sunrise and continuing late into the night. Lieutenant Hayes led these exercises, his voice steady and encouraging as he pushed his squad to their limits. The drills weren't flashy or overly complicated, just simple movements designed to build muscle memory and teamwork. They practiced clearing rooms, setting up ambushes, and coordinating fire support. Nothing groundbreaking, but the way they executed it was mesmerizing. Every step, every gesture was precise, almost instinctual. It was as if they could read each other's minds. Zorvac watched one morning as Private Ethan Cole demonstrated how to disarm an enemy soldier without firing a shot. Using nothing more than quick footwork and a well-timed grab, he managed to twist a practice dummy's arm behind its back and bring it crashing to the ground. The move was fast, efficient, and left no room for error. The rest of the squad cheered, clapping Ethan on the back as he stood up grinning. "Not bad, kid," Hayes said, nodding approvingly. "But remember, speed isn't everything. You gotta stay calm under pressure." That phrase stuck with Zorvac. Stay calm under pressure. He realized that was the key to understanding these humans. While other species relied on brute force or superior tech, the humans thrived on adaptability and mental toughness. They didn't panic when things went wrong. They adjusted. And they did it seamlessly, without hesitation. Watching them work together felt less like observing soldiers and more like witnessing the inner workings of a single organism. Each person played their part perfectly, trusting the others to do the same. Captain Monroe was another puzzle altogether. Unlike Hayes, who exuded a natural charisma, Monroe was quieter, more reserved. But her presence commanded respect. She rarely raised her voice, yet everyone listened when she spoke. Her role seemed to be less about leading charges and more about strategy, planning missions, analyzing threats, and ensuring resources were used wisely. Zorvac noticed how she spent hours poring over maps and schematics, marking potential weak points in the base's defenses. When she walked through the camp, soldiers stopped whatever they were doing to salute her, not out of obligation but genuine admiration. One evening, Zorvac decided to approach her again. This time she was sitting alone near a makeshift fire pit, staring into the flames. Her rifle leaned against a nearby crate within easy reach. Zorvac hesitated briefly before stepping closer. "Captain Monroe," he said, his deep voice cutting through the quiet hum of the night. "May I join you?" She glanced up, her expression unreadable in the flickering light. After a moment, she nodded. "Sure. Have a seat." Zorvac lowered himself onto a log opposite her, careful not to let his massive frame overwhelm the space. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched on, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant hum of machinery. Finally, Zorvac broke the ice. "I've been watching your people," he admitted. "They're unusual." Monroe raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Unusual? Is that good or bad?" "Neither," Zorvac replied. "Just unexpected. Most soldiers rely on strength or technology. Your team fights differently." "That's because we don't have much of either," Monroe said matter-of-factly. "We can't afford to go toe-to-toe with enemies who have better gear or bigger armies. So we focus on what we can control: our mindset, our preparation, our ability to think on our feet." Zorvac tilted his head, intrigued. "And that works?" "It has to," Monroe said simply. "Out here, failure isn't an option. If we lose this moon, it won't just be us paying the price. Billions of lives depend on holding this line. We're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for everyone back home." Her words struck a chord with Zorvac. He had always fought for credits, for survival, for the thrill of battle. Never for something as abstract as everyone back home. To him, war was a business transaction, a means to an end. But these humans saw it differently. They believed in causes larger than themselves, even if those causes meant risking everything. As the night wore on, Monroe shared stories of Earth's history, the wars humanity had fought, the struggles they had endured, and the lessons they had learned along the way. She spoke of battles where outnumbered forces triumphed through sheer determination, of leaders who inspired their troops to keep going when all hope seemed lost. Zorvac listened intently, fascinated by the tales of resilience and ingenuity. These humans hadn't always been strong or powerful, she explained. In fact, for much of their history, they had been vulnerable, preyed upon by stronger nations and harsh environments. But instead of giving up, they adapted. They found ways to survive, to grow, to protect what mattered most. By the time the fire burned down to embers, Zorvak found himself looking at the humans in a new light. They weren't just soldiers, they were survivors. And perhaps that was why they inspired such fear among mercenaries like him. It wasn't their weapons or their numbers that made them dangerous. It was their refusal to give up no matter how dire the situation. The next day brought fresh challenges. A small group of Vorthak scouts had ventured too close to the base, testing the defenses. The humans responded swiftly, deploying snipers to pick off the intruders from a distance. Corporal Lucas Bennett, a wiry young man with sharp eyes and quicker reflexes, took aim from a hidden position atop a rocky ridge. One by one, the Vorthak fell, unaware of the danger lurking in the shadows. When the last scout collapsed, Hayes gave the signal to move in and retrieve any useful intel. Zorvak accompanied the recovery team, curious to see how the humans handled themselves in the field. What he witnessed left him speechless. They moved like ghosts, slipping silently through the dense underbrush without disturbing a single leaf. When they reached the site of the skirmish, Bennett knelt beside one of the fallen Vorthak, examining its equipment with clinical precision. "This one's got a comms device," he reported, holding up a strange-looking gadget. "Could be useful for intercepting transmissions." Hayes nodded. "Good catch. Bag it and tag it. Let's see if Monroe can make sense of it." As they worked, Zorvak marveled at their efficiency. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary chatter. Every action served a purpose, contributing to the greater goal. Even when one of the soldiers stumbled and nearly dropped a piece of evidence, they recovered instantly, brushing off the mistake with a muttered apology. No one panicked. No one froze. They simply kept moving forward. Back at the base, Captain Monroe examined the captured devices, her brow furrowed in concentration. Within minutes, she had deciphered enough of the alien code to reveal critical information about the Vorthak's next move. "They're planning a full-scale assault," she announced grimly. "Probably within the next 48 hours. We need to prepare." The news sent ripples of tension through the camp, but the humans didn't waste time panicking. Instead, they sprang into action, fortifying the perimeter, stockpiling ammunition, and running emergency drills. Zorvak watched as Megan Riley, the squad's communications expert, coordinated with the Krylos fleet overhead, ensuring reinforcements would arrive in time. Her fingers flew across her console, relaying updates and issuing orders with calm authority. Despite the stakes, she never once faltered. Throughout it all, Zorvak couldn't shake the feeling that he was witnessing something extraordinary. These humans weren't just preparing for battle, they were preparing to win. Against overwhelming odds with limited resources and no guarantee of success, they refused to entertain the possibility of defeat. It was as if failure wasn't even in their vocabulary. That night, as Zorvak lay awake in his quarters, he replayed the day's events in his mind. The humans' discipline, their creativity, their unwavering resolve, it all added up to something far greater than the sum of its parts. For the first time in his long career, Zorvak felt a twinge of doubt. Could his team really hold its own, alongside these warriors? Or would they pale in comparison when the real fight began? He didn't know the answer yet. But one thing was certain. The humans of Delta 7 were unlike anything he'd ever encountered. And whether he liked it or not, they were about to change the way he looked at warfare, and perhaps even life itself. The Vorthak horde didn't waste time. True to Captain Monroe's prediction, they launched their attack just before dawn, catching the defenders in the gray light of early morning. The first sign of trouble came as a low hum in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Zorvak stood on the edge of the base, his glowing eyes scanning the horizon. Through the thin mist that clung to the ground, he saw movement, shapes shifting and multiplying like shadows come to life. The Vorthak were advancing, their insectoid bodies gleaming faintly under the weak sunlight. Zorvak had seen plenty of battles in his lifetime, but this moment felt different. There was an eerie stillness in the air, broken only by the rhythmic clicking of the Vorthak's chitinous limbs against the rocky terrain. They moved in perfect unison, a swarm of predators closing in on their prey. For a brief moment, even Zorvak felt a flicker of unease. These creatures weren't just soldiers, they were hunters, driven by instinct and hunger. And they outnumbered the humans by at least 10 to 1. But if the humans were afraid, they didn't show it. As the hum grew into a deafening roar, Lieutenant Hayes barked orders over the comms, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Alpha Squad, hold the South Ridge. Bravo, set up flanking positions near the supply depot. Charlie, stay mobile and watch for breaches. Each command was clear and precise, leaving no room for confusion. Soldiers scrambled to their assigned posts, their movements quick but controlled. Weapons were checked, barricades reinforced, and traps armed. Within minutes, the entire base transformed into a fortress, ready to repel the incoming tide. Zorvak and his team took up position near the main gate, where the Vorthak were likely to strike hardest. He exchanged glances with his second-in-command, Trelk, a wiry alien with leathery skin and sharp teeth. Stay alert, Zorvak growled. These bugs don't play fair. Trelk nodded grimly. Understood, but I've got a bad feeling about this, boss. Humans might be clever, but they're still outnumbered. We'll see, Zorvak muttered, though he couldn't deny the kernel of doubt gnawing at him. What exactly were the humans planning? Could they really hold off such a massive force? As if on cue, the first wave of Vorthak surged forward, their mandibles snapping and claws glinting. They charged without hesitation, their speed and ferocity unmatched. For a moment, it seemed impossible that anything could stop them. Then the humans struck back. Hidden turrets along the ridge erupted to life, spitting fire and lead into the charging horde. The Vorthak faltered, their ranks shredded by the sudden barrage. But what truly caught Zorvak's attention was how the humans used their environment to their advantage. Explosive charges buried in the ground detonated in sequence, creating craters that funneled the attackers into kill zones. Snipers picked off stragglers from concealed positions, while squads, armed with flamethrowers, pushed forward to burn away any survivors. It was chaos, but controlled chaos. Private Ethan Cole proved himself particularly resourceful during the fight. Stationed near the supply depot, he noticed a group of Vorthak attempting to flank the human defenses. Without waiting for orders, he grabbed a handful of grenades and rigged them together with wires scavenged from nearby equipment. When the Vorthak reached the halfway point, he triggered the makeshift bomb remotely, sending a shockwave through their ranks. Bodies flew in, all directions, and the survivors scattered, disoriented. Cole didn't stop there. He followed up with a burst of gunfire, finishing off the dazed enemies before retreating to safety. Zorvak couldn't help but feel impressed. The humans weren't just fighting. They were improvising, adapting to every twist and turn of the battle. Their tactics were unconventional, sometimes even reckless, but they worked. Even Trelk grudgingly admitted as much. They're good, he said, reloading his rifle. I'll give them that. But the Vorthak weren't done yet. A second wave crashed against the defenses, larger and more determined than the first. This time they brought heavy weapons, energy cannons mounted on hovering platforms that spat beams of searing light. The humans' makeshift barricades began to buckle under the onslaught, forcing them to fall back to secondary positions. Zorvak watched as Captain Monroe directed the retreat, her voice calm but firm. Fall back to Grid B5, set up crossfire and hold them there. Her squad obeyed without question, moving with practiced efficiency. As they regrouped, Corporal Lucas Bennett sprinted toward a damaged Vorthak drone lying half-buried in the dirt. Ignoring the danger, he pried open its casing and began tinkering with its internal systems. Within moments, the drone whirred back to life, not under Vorthak control but under Bennett's. He guided it toward the enemy lines, where it unleashed a torrent of fire on its former allies. The distraction gave the humans precious seconds to regroup and counterattack. Meanwhile, Sergeant Megan Riley worked tirelessly to maintain communication between units. Her fingers danced across her console as she relayed updates and coordinated strikes. At one point, when a Vorthak sniper pinned down Alpha Squad, Riley pinpointed the shooter's location using thermal imaging and directed a mortar strike that eliminated the threat. "Clear," she called out over the comms, her tone triumphant, despite the sweat dripping down her face. For hours the battle raged on, ebbing and flowing like waves crashing against a cliff. The humans fought with everything they had, refusing to yield an inch. Every time the Vorthak gained ground, the humans found a way to push them back. They used smoke bombs to obscure vision, EMP devices to disable enemy tech, and sheer audacity to keep the Vorthak guessing. Even when the odds seemed insurmountable, they pressed on, fueled by determination and teamwork. Lieutenant Hayes exemplified this spirit better than anyone. Leading from the front, he inspired his squad with his courage and resolve. At one point, when a Vorthak mech stomped into the fray, smashing through barricades with ease, Hayes didn't hesitate. Grabbing a rocket launcher from a fallen soldier, he fired a single shot that struck the mech's weak point, sending it toppling to the ground. Cheers erupted from the humans as they swarmed the wreckage, looting its remains for spare parts. By midday, the Vorthak finally broke. Their losses were staggering, their morale shattered. Withdrawing in disarray, they left behind a battlefield littered with twisted metal and broken bodies. The humans didn't pursue them. They didn't need to. The message had been sent loud and clear. Delta 7 wasn't going to fall without a fight. As the dust settled, Zorvak surveyed the aftermath. The base was battered but intact, its defenders weary but victorious. Smoke curled into the sky, mingling with the acrid smell of burnt metal and scorched earth. Human soldiers tended to their wounded, shared ration packs, and patched up damaged equipment. Despite the carnage, there was a sense of quiet pride in the air. They had held the line. Captain Monroe approached Zorvak, her expression unreadable. "So," she said, crossing her arms, "what do you think now?" Zorvak hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "You humans, you fight differently. Not stronger or faster, but smarter. You adapt. You survive." Monroe smiled faintly. "That's the secret, isn't it? Survival isn't about being the biggest or the best. It's about never giving up." Zorvak nodded slowly, a newfound respect stirring within him. These humans weren't just soldiers. They were something more, something dangerous, and deep. Down, he knew that the Vorthak wouldn't forget this defeat easily. If anything, it would make them angrier, more desperate. But for now, the humans had won, and Zorvak couldn't help but wonder, what else were they capable of? The aftermath of the battle left an uneasy calm over Delta 7. The humans worked tirelessly to repair the damage, their movements deliberate and focused, despite the exhaustion etched on their faces. Barricades were rebuilt, weapons cleaned and reloaded, and medical supplies distributed among the wounded. Zorvak watched as Captain Monroe directed the cleanup efforts with quiet authority, her voice steady, even as she winced from a shallow cut on her forearm. It was clear that no one planned to rest, not while the threat of another attack loomed. Among the mercenaries, however, the mood was different. While the humans prepared for what might come next, Zorvak's team gathered in hushed tones near their ship, sharing thoughts about the battle they had just witnessed. Trelk, his sharp teeth flashing in the dim light, broke the silence first. "I've seen a lot of fights," he said, shaking his head, "but nothing like that. Those humans, they're not normal." Zorvak nodded slowly, his glowing eyes fixed on the horizon where the Vorthak had retreated. "No," he agreed, "they're not." Trelk leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You heard the rumors, right? About why mercenaries avoid fighting humans?" Zorvak frowned. "What rumors?" "There's talk," Trelk continued, glancing around as if worried someone might overhear. "Stories passed down from older crews. They say humans don't fight, like other species. They don't rely on tech or numbers, they rely on something else. Something we can't match." Zorvak raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" "I don't know," Trelk admitted. "Some call it instinct. Others say it's luck. But most agree. It's dangerous. Too dangerous to mess with unless you have No choice. The conversation spread quickly through the ranks of the alien mercenaries. By nightfall, nearly everyone had heard some version of the same tale. One story claimed that during a skirmish decades ago, a single human squad wiped out an entire battalion of elite shock troopers using nothing but knives and rocks. Another described how a lone human pilot once flew a damaged fighter into enemy territory, destroying 3 capital ships before vanishing without a trace. Whether these accounts were true or exaggerated didn't matter. What mattered was the fear they inspired. Even Zorvak, who prided himself on his rationality, found himself pondering the stories. He thought back to the way Lieutenant Hayes had led his team with such confidence, how Private Ethan Cole had rigged explosives out of scraps, and how Sergeant Megan Riley had turned technology against its creators. There was a pattern here, a thread connecting all their actions. Humans weren't just resourceful, they were relentless. They adapted faster than anyone Zorvak had ever encountered, turning disadvantages into opportunities and weaknesses into strengths. As the hours passed, more details emerged about humanity's reputation in the galaxy. Some mercenaries whispered about Earth's early days of space exploration, when humanity first ventured beyond its solar system. Back then, humans were considered weak and insignificant, easy targets for larger empires looking to expand their territories. But instead of bowing to pressure, humans fought back, hard. They formed alliances, learned advanced technologies, and built fleets capable of rivaling even the oldest civilizations. Their rise wasn't smooth, far from it, but it was unstoppable. Others spoke of specific battles where humans had turned the tide against overwhelming odds. The siege of Proxima Centauri, for example, became legendary after a small human task. Force held off a pirate armada long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Then there was the Battle of Epsilon 9, where human engineers reverse-engineered captured alien weaponry mid-fight, using it to devastating effect. These victories weren't won by brute strength or superior firepower. They were won by ingenuity, teamwork, and sheer willpower. But perhaps the strangest rumor of all involved the concept of a hive mind. According to this theory, humans could somehow share thoughts during combat, allowing them to act as a single entity rather than individual soldiers. Zorvak dismissed the idea immediately. It sounded too far-fetched, but he couldn't deny the eerie coordination he'd observed firsthand. How did they move so seamlessly? How did they anticipate each other's actions with such precision? Curious, Zorvak decided to test the theory himself. Over the next few days, he paid closer attention to the humans' interactions, looking for signs of telepathy or other supernatural abilities. What he found instead was something far simpler and far more impressive. The humans communicated constantly, both verbally and non-verbally. A glance, a nod, or a subtle shift in posture conveyed volumes of information between teammates. They trusted each other implicitly, knowing exactly what to do without needing explicit instructions. It wasn't a hive mind, it was chemistry. Years of training and shared experiences had forged bonds stronger than any psychic link. Despite his growing admiration for the humans, Zorvak still struggled to reconcile their behavior with everything he knew about warfare. In his experience, soldiers followed orders because they had to, not because they wanted to. Loyalty was often enforced through fear or discipline, yet here were these humans, working together not out of obligation but out of genuine camaraderie. They joked and laughed between tasks, treating each other like family. Even in the heat of battle, they looked out for one another, risking their lives to save comrades in danger. It was baffling and inspiring. One evening, Zorvak approached Lieutenant Hayes as he supervised repairs on a damaged turret. "Lieutenant?" Zorvak began, his deep voice cutting through the hum of activity. "May I ask you something?" Hayes glanced up, wiping grease-streaked hands on his uniform. "Sure. What's on your mind?" "Your people," Zorvak said, choosing his words carefully. "You fight differently from others I've seen. Why is that?" Hayes chuckled softly, leaning against the turret. "It's simple, really. We're not fighting for glory or money, we're fighting for each other. For our families, our friends, our planet. When you care about something that much, giving up isn't an option. Zorvak considered this answer, letting it sink in. Fighting for something greater than oneself. That was a concept he understood, though he rarely practiced it himself. Most mercenaries fought for credits or survival, viewing every mission as a transaction. Emotions were liabilities, distractions that could get you killed. But for these humans, emotions were weapons. Passion fueled their resolve and love gave them strength. Over the next few days, Zorvak noticed how deeply this philosophy permeated every aspect of the humans' lives. During meals, they shared stories and laughter, celebrating small victories and mourning losses together. When someone was injured, others volunteered to take on extra shifts to lighten the load. Even Captain Monroe, usually reserved, joined in occasionally, offering words of encouragement or cracking rare smiles. It was as if the entire unit operated on a foundation of mutual respect and trust. This sense of unity extended beyond their own ranks. The humans treated the Krylos representatives stationed at the base with surprising kindness, sharing food and resources despite cultural differences. Corporal Lucas Bennett spent hours teaching curious aliens basic phrases in English, laughing good-naturedly at their mispronunciations. Sergeant Megan Riley went out of her way to ensure the Krylos medics had access to human medical supplies, explaining their uses in detail. These gestures weren't required. They were offered freely out of goodwill. Zorvak found himself drawn to this dynamic, though he couldn't fully explain why. Perhaps it reminded him of his own crew, fractured though they were by years of hardship and mistrust. Or perhaps it awakened something buried deep within him, a longing for connection, for belonging. Whatever the reason, he felt a strange kinship with these humans, even as he struggled to articulate it. By the end of the week, the whispers among the mercenaries had shifted. No longer were they debating whether humans were dangerous. They were certain of it. But now the question was why. What made these fragile-looking beings so formidable? Was it their adaptability, their teamwork, their refusal to surrender? Each mercenary had their own theory, but one thing was clear. None of them wanted to face humans in direct combat unless absolutely necessary. For Zorvak, the realization came gradually. Watching the humans prepare for the inevitable next wave of Vorthak attacks, he understood what truly set them apart. It wasn't their weapons or their strategies, it was their spirit. They didn't fight because they had to. They fought because they believed in themselves, in each other, in the future they were trying to protect. And that belief made them unstoppable. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the base, Zorvak stood quietly, observing the humans as they worked. For the first time in his life, he felt a pang of envy, not for their skills or their resources, but for the bond they shared. If only his own team could operate with such cohesion, such purpose. If only. But those thoughts would have to wait. The Vorthak were regrouping, gathering their forces for another assault, and when they returned, the humans would be ready. Of that, Zorvak had no doubt. The days leading up to the next Vorthak attack were tense but productive. The humans worked tirelessly, fortifying their defenses and preparing for the inevitable clash. Zorvak observed them closely, marveling at their ability to balance hard, work with moments of levity. Even as they dug trenches and reinforced barricades, laughter echoed through the base. Soldiers shared jokes, teased one another, and found ways to lift each other's spirits. It was a stark contrast to the grim silence that often preceded battle among other species. One afternoon, while scouting near the edge of the base, Zorvak stumbled upon Captain Monroe. She was crouched beside a damaged drone, her hands smeared with grease as she tinkered with its internal components. Tools lay scattered around her, and the faint hum of the machine suggested she was close to getting it operational again. Curious, Zorvak approached cautiously, unsure if he should interrupt. Monroe glanced up when she noticed him standing nearby. "Zorvak," she said, offering a small smile. "What brings you out here?" "I was exploring," Zorvak replied, his deep voice hesitant. He gestured toward the drone. You're fixing that? Trying to, Monroe admitted, wiping her hands on a rag. It's not my area of expertise, but we can't afford to waste anything right now. Every little bit helps. Zorvac studied the drone for a moment before speaking. Why do you do this? Why take on tasks outside your role? Monroe shrugged, leaning back on her heels. Because we're all in this together. If someone needs help, you step up. That's how we survive. Her answer struck Zorvac. It wasn't just about survival, it was about responsibility. These humans didn't wait for orders. They acted because they felt accountable for the group's success. It was a mindset foreign to many mercenaries who prioritized personal gain over collective well-being. Yet here was Monroe, sacrificing her own comfort to repair a piece of equipment she barely understood, all for the greater good. As they talked, Zorvac learned more about Monroe's background. She had grown up in a small town on Earth, where teamwork and community were valued above all else. Her father had been a mechanic, teaching her the importance of fixing things rather than discarding them. When she joined the military, those lessons stayed with her, shaping her leadership style. I'm not the strongest or the smartest person here, she confessed. But I know how to bring people together. That's my job. Zorvac nodded slowly, processing her words. There was no arrogance in her tone, only quiet confidence. She didn't see herself as extraordinary, just part of something bigger. And perhaps that was the key to understanding humanity. They weren't driven by ego or ambition. They were driven by connection. Later that evening, Zorvac returned to the main camp, where Lieutenant Hayes was overseeing a training exercise. A group of soldiers practiced hand-to-hand combat under his watchful eye, their movements sharp and deliberate. When Hayes noticed Zorvac watching, he waved him over. Want to join us? He asked with a grin. We could use some fresh perspective. Zorvac hesitated, unsure how to respond. He wasn't accustomed to participating in such activities, especially with humans. But curiosity got the better of him, and he stepped forward. Hayes paired him with Private Ethan Cole, whose wiry frame seemed ill-suited to face someone of Zorvac's size and strength. Yet when the sparring began, Cole proved surprisingly agile, dodging Zorvac's attacks with ease and countering with quick strikes aimed at weak points. After several minutes, Hayes called an end to the session. Not bad, he said, clapping Zorvac on the shoulder. You've got power, but you need to work on your speed. Zorvac frowned, unused to receiving feedback or criticism from anyone outside his team. But instead of feeling insulted, he found himself intrigued. These humans weren't intimidated by him. They treated him as an equal, offering guidance without condescension. It was refreshing. As night fell, the base settled into a rare moment of calm. Soldiers gathered around makeshift fires, sharing stories and rations. Zorvac joined them, reluctantly, unsure if he belonged. To his surprise, they welcomed him warmly, making space for him on a log near the flames. Corporal Lucas Bennett handed him a cup of steaming liquid, coffee, he explained, and launched into a tale about a botched mission on a distant colony. The story was light-hearted, filled with mishaps and humorous misunderstandings, and soon, the entire group was laughing. For the first time in years, Zorvac felt a sense of belonging. These humans didn't judge him based on his reputation or appearance. They accepted him as he was. Their camaraderie was infectious, drawing him in despite his initial reservations. By the time the fire burned down to embers, he found himself reluctant to leave. The next morning, Zorvac accompanied Sergeant Megan Riley on a patrol of the perimeter. Armed with binoculars and scanning devices, they moved silently through the rocky terrain, searching for signs of enemy activity. Riley explained the importance of maintaining constant vigilance, pointing out subtle indicators of potential threats, a disturbed patch of dirt here, a broken branch there. It's all about paying attention, she said. Even the smallest detail can save lives. Zorvac listened intently, impressed by her attention to detail. Humans weren't naturally gifted hunters like the Vorthak, yet they compensated with observation and analysis. It was another example of their adaptability, their willingness to learn and improve. As they reached the edge of the patrol zone, Riley paused, gazing out at the horizon. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think we were alone out here, that no one cared what happened to us, but seeing you and your team, it makes me realize we're not. We've got allies, even if they're unexpected ones." Zorvac turned to look at her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. "And you trust us?" Riley smiled faintly. "Trust isn't given lightly, but actions speak louder than words. You've earned our respect, Zorvac. That's a start." Her words lingered in Zorvac's mind long after they returned to the base. Trust, respect. These were concepts he rarely encountered in his line of work. Mercenaries operated on contracts and credits, not relationships. Yet here were these humans, extending a hand, not because they had to, but because they chose to. Over the next few days, Zorvac continued to immerse himself in the rhythm of life at Delta 7. He helped Private Cole repair a damaged generator, learned basic phrases in English from Corporal Bennett, and even joined Lieutenant Hayes for target practice. Each interaction deepened his understanding of humanity and challenged his preconceptions. By the time the Vorthak launched their second major assault, Zorvac felt differently about the humans. They were no longer strangers or clients, they were comrades. When the alarm sounded and the defenders rushed to their posts, Zorvac stood shoulder to shoulder with them, ready to fight, not just for payment, but for something greater. As the UE battle unfolded, Zorvac fought alongside the humans, his glowing eyes blazing with determination. Together they held the line, turning back wave after wave of Vorthak attackers. For the first time, Zorvac didn't feel like an outsider looking in. He was part of something, a team, a family, a cause worth fighting for. When the dust settled, and the Vorthak retreated once more, Zorvac looked around at the weary but triumphant faces of his new allies. He realized then that the humans' greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their tactics. It was their ability to inspire loyalty, to unite people across species and cultures. And in doing so, they had changed him forever.